All right, so we can get started with tonight's lecture. First, I wanted to just introduce myself. I'm Megan McCrae, and I'm the program and coordinator of the BYTOWN Museum. So first off, I want to say thank you guys for coming tonight. It's our first lecture of the fall season, so we're happy to have Emma on board. Before we begin, I wanted to just give a land acknowledgement. So the city of Ottawa, the Ottawa Locks, the BYTOWN Museum, and Commissariat are built on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived in this territory for millennia. Their culture and their presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this place. The BYTOWN Museum honors the people in the land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. All right, so this evening, Emma, our guest speaker, will take us on a journey through the history of street art in Ottawa from decades before until now. Emma is a historian with a passion for Ottawa's local history. Her work exploring the history of Ottawa ranges from her personal history with the Girl Guide through her blog Beyond the Badge, collecting the history of Girl Guides, to guided tours and Zoom workshops. In the spring of 2021, Emma joined the board of directors of the Historical Society of Ottawa, and she is the current president. Her work also includes webcomic #LD, where she highlights living for learning disabilities. So our evening will begin with presentation from Emma, and then we'll dive into a Q&A period, ending with the time for some audience questions, which Emma will answer herself. If we're good to go, I will now pass off to Emma, and thank you guys for coming and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Megan. I'm just going to share my screen and then we can get started. So hello, my name's Emma, for those who don't know me. A little bit about me is I'm the current president of the Historical Society of Ottawa. I was born in Ottawa and I went to Carleton for history. Currently, one of my jobs is managing a pottery painting studio. And it's kind of these two interests of like being an art nerd and being a history nerd that kind of led me to fall in love with the city's public art. I like to think of myself as an enthusiastic viewer and audience member. I don't, other than that, viewing, I don't engage in any street art, but I am happy to find it and to look at it. So what is street art, or what is public art? And is it all that different than the art that we find in a museum and gallery? Well, yes and no. Street or public art is any media made up for the general public and often through a public process. It is art that has to be either physically or physically accessible to the community and to the public. It can be indoors or it can be outdoors, and it tends to aim to have universal values rather than commercial ones. Public art in Canadian cities has really undergone a change in the last few decades. The group The Artful City published an article in 2016 that looked at the history of public art in Toronto. And one of the things this article notes is that Toronto had public art dating back to the 1870s, but the city of Toronto didn't fund this art. Rather, it was groups of citizens who would come together to raise funds and then give them to the cities to build the public art or to donate the public art. And this was a pattern until about the 1960s. Now, an auto example of this would be the HSO's own statue of Colonel By, found in Major Hills Park across the canal and overlooks the BYTOWN Museum. For those who don't know, Colonel By was a British officer and member of the Royal Engineers. And in 1826, he was given orders to build the canal that would link the Ottawa River to the Lake Ontario. And in this process, created BYTOWN, later renamed Ottawa. Now, the HSO funded this statue, and it was created by a Canadian artist, and it was placed in the park in 1971. Now, public art really started entering city planning in the 1970s and 1980s, when more cities started to include big office buildings with large courtyards that needed filling. Here's an office complex very close to my house, and you can see the space has been filled with a garden and these large statues. Since the 1990s, when a city looks at revitalizing a community and space, we almost always see public art get included in the planning. And in the last few decades, there's more of an interest in public art and more of an understanding that public art doesn't have to last forever. And very similar to a museum or a gallery, it can change and get reimagined in a space. Now, this mural is found in the glebe, and it depicts a wild buffalo being brought to life through the imagination of a child. It was a part of a 2018 international mural project that had the goal of painting 25 murals in 25 different cities across the world. And it was a way to promote Colombia as a destination for street art, and this was through the project called Vertigo Graffiti. The goal was to create international peace. Now, this buffalo was really important because a buffalo is found in both in Canada and Colombia, and it was a way to link the two nations together. The glebe worked with the Embassy of Colombia to make this mural possible. Now, in Colombia, street art is a huge part of street culture. And one of the artists behind this mural said that it's one of the community's favorite ways to express themselves. And you can tell the feel and the emotion and the values behind a city through its public art. Now, looking back to find an Ottawa example, this would be the Blue Collar Worker by Ryan Stimpin that was painted in 2018. This mural was painted in Hintonburg at the request of the building owner to cover up tags and to prevent graffiti. This mural represents the history of how Hintonburg has historically always been a working class city or town. And you have the wrench that goes back to the roots, but you also have him holding the flowers, which shows the community's recent growth and renewal. Now, before we move on, I want you to take a really good look at this garage. This is also by my house, and I want you to consider the following question. What on this garage is street art, and what is graffiti? Now, I'm going to give you two simple definitions of the term. And graffiti is any unauthorized writing or drawing on a space that's in the public. And street art is a form of artwork that is displayed in the public that usually has public values and is done through a legal process. So basically, the biggest difference between graffiti and street art is that graffiti is illegal and street art is legal. It doesn't have to do with skill. It doesn't have to do with beauty. It's just what's legal and what's not. Now, these two terms, the meaning has changed over time. And as we go forward, the meanings will probably change again. But these are the kind of two ideas I want you to hold, is that one's legal and one's illegal. Now, graffiti has always existed alongside of people. It can be found in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Here on the screen, we see ancient graffiti found in Pompeii, and actually is a political message. Here we see graffiti having this like wonderful historical value, and they have actually used graffiti found in ancient cities to learn more about Roman street life, political, and just everyday life. Really at its core is graffiti and street art is a message the artist has left for the viewer. Now, contemporary graffiti has been heavily influenced by the hip hop culture and the later the punk culture. Although tagging existed earlier, our best understanding of modern tagging started in about 1960s in Philadelphia by 14-year-old Daryl McCrae, who started writing his nickname Cornbread all over his community walls. As 14-year-olds do, his friends joined in, and quickly the movement spread to New York and Europe and across the world. As the graffiti movement started to grow and develop, we see the same tools and skills and meanings being brought into our modern street art culture. Now, graffiti can be annoying and expensive to clean up, but at its core is a way to communicate. Currently, we're seeing graffiti and street art being used to leave impactful political message. A few summers ago, it was being used in the Black Lives Matter movement, and that was a picture on screen of a poster that I took along Wellington. We also see it being used in the Stand with Ukraine. Personally, one of my favorite acts of graffiti that I have come across is this loonie that's shown on screen. In 2019, a BC environmental group placed about 1,000 stickers on 1,000 different loonies to promote the message of against the pipeline. And I just thought this was really clever and interesting because it moves so well. You can put a coin in someone's hand and they can travel across the country, and it's something I still hold today. Now, I think art done with posters or spray paint or anything done on a wall can be easily overlooked and discredited. But I think there's a lot of meaning and skill if you take the time to look. Now, public transportation like buses, streetcars, subway has always played an important part in the graffiti movement. In the culture, there's this idea of getting up or building your rep. And you can do this in a couple of different ways. You can be really, really good. You can get into a lot of challenging spots that make viewers stop and wonder how you got there. Or you can leave your name and artwork in as many different spaces as possible. And for the latter, public transportation is great because you can write your name on a train and the train moves for you, increasing your audience. Now, the city of Ottawa is also embracing combining public art with transportation, and this can be seen in a couple different ways. Walking around the city, you might see traffic boxes covered in OC Transpo wrapping that shows either the O train or different methods of transportation. But since 2012, they also launched a project called the O Train Public Art Project. And along with that project, there was a call for Algonquin artists, and the station Pimisi is exclusively Algonquin artists. Along in one of the stations, in line stations, we see the HSO being engaged again with public art. And on screen shows a statue with words as the actions by one of the Toronto group. Now, this statue shows the silhouettes of the 13 women who started the Historical Society of Ottawa as the Women's Canadian Historical Society, and includes the 5,000 words of the earliest pamphlet. Now, this group of women and the society would later go on to found the BYTOWN Museum. Now, going back to graffiti, because of the limited space in a city, there's only so many walls and surfaces you can write on. The community has kind of created this hierarchy. So it encourages things to be covered up and painted over. And on this slide, I'm going to give you a simple definition of each kind of element of this hierarchy. We have a tag, which is the artist's own personal name written in their own style. We have a piece, which is a more elaborate writing of the name. It can incorporate more colors and styles. And the more time you put into a piece, the more you increase your chances of getting caught. So this can be a little bit more risky than just a tag. And at the top of this hierarchy, we have a mural. And this hierarchy really just looks at tag and murals, but there's other graffiti communities as well with their own kind of rules and customs. There's stickers, there's posters, there's 3D print objects. There's also people who paint rocks and add them to places. And I also want to point out that sometimes there's people who engage in this culture graffiti who might not even be aware of what they're doing, that what their actions are graffiti. Now, a tag can be covered by a throw up or a piece, and a piece by a mural. You can also cover work with better work, and most artists will respect their place in the hierarchy. Now, if you look back to the picture of the garage I showed before, you might notice one side is covered in tags and the other side isn't. And this is because of that hierarchy, where the unused side will be covered and they'll most likely respect the mural. Now, with this understanding, cities has actually used this understanding of the hierarchy to limit spaces where tags might be. So if they see an area that is being heavily tagged, they might add a mural to help prevent that. And the city actually has a program called Paint It Up, which partners the city of Ottawa with Ottawa Crime Prevention. And they'll actually fund different mural projects as a way to control graffiti. Now, to go over someone's work or to paint over it and to break that hierarchy is almost like declaring war on them. And this can quickly get the writer labeled as annoying or as a toy, and this can be dangerous both physically and professionally as well. Some crews or artists will react through social media like we see on screen, and it can also be dangerous physically. Now, this was posted on Dan Mentelock, who is a local artist from Hintonburg, and this was a mural he did a few months ago that was then later tagged. Artists will often go back and take care of their pieces, and this is also one of the ways the city can use artists' work to protect against tags. Now, historically, most murals in Ottawa were commissioned by business improvement areas to prevent graffitis. However, in the fall of 2018, Sarah May hired Montreal-based artist RP to paint a mural of some flowers and her dog on her Hintonburg home. This was to cover some unwanted tags. May joked that she was taking a break from tattooing her body to tattoo her house instead. It took RP about 3 days to paint this mural, and 5 days after the mural was completed, a bylaw officer came by and let May know that she had to cover the graffiti or the mural because it was considered graffiti. And that under the Ottawa Permanent Signs bylaw, that murals on homes were not allowed in residential areas. They were allowed on schools, places of worship, community center, but not homes. Lucky for us, May was not going to take this sitting down, and she contacted CBC and her local councillor who asked bylaw to put a halt on their report so he could make a motion in City Hall. May contacted multiple news sources and started doing interviews. Now, she was very lucky. At one point when she was giving an interview to CBC, the old mayor, Jim Watson, happened to walk by, and CBC started asking him questions, and Jim responds with, is a homeowner okay with it? And May was like, I'm the homeowner. And Jim was like, send me an email. And that's kind of started the process of allowing murals on home. In another interview with the CBC, Jim Watson explained that that bylaw had existed to prevent homes from becoming billboards for advertisements. But this new idea this mural marked an important shift in how Ottawa saw murals. And increasingly over the next few years, we're seeing more and more murals being added to homes in Hintonburg and other communities. Now, this isn't to say that barriers don't exist. When applying for a mural, you still have to follow certain bylaws, you have to submit a permit, and you also have to make sure that you have enough funds to take care of the mural. So though we do have murals on homes, there's still some barriers for artists. Now, this mural has been painted over in the last few years, but that's also kind of the nature of street art, that you get to enjoy it while it's here, but get excited for finding the next one. Now, another barrier for artists, especially in Ottawa, can be legal spots for artists to paint and practice. Ottawa does have 3 legal walls where artists can go and paint legally, and one is in Orleans, one is on Slater, and one is on Bronxton Avenue. This is where the House of Paint will have their yearly hip hop and graffiti festival. But in a city as big as Ottawa, is this really enough space? On screen are some screenshots of legal walls, and that's a website artists can use to look in different cities and see how many legal walls are in the area. And if you see North America only has about 200 legal spaces, while Europe has 10 times that. So it's really not a lot of space for artists to paint and practice. Now, street art is also increasingly becoming more engaged in the public, and the Parkdale art wall is a perfect example about how street art is becoming more and more community focused, or the community is getting more interested in it. Now, this project is run by the Wellington West BIA, and it was created after artist Daniel Mentalock in 2018 approached them with the idea of creating a public art wall. And the idea was that it would be put in a park and artists could apply and have their work painted on it. And the mural would get changed up every 3 or 4 months. The painting was hopefully going to be done in a community setting and in a community event, so the community could then go and watch it and make a connection with the artist and the process. Now, the original idea of this mural project was that they would just paint over it, but people started to fall in love. So they actually started putting them on wood and just replacing them, and then adding those murals to the pool house in Hintonburg Park and other areas of the community. Now, one of the important things to know about public art and street art is how important of it is being temporary. A mural might only last a decade or 2, but this forces a community to revisit their values. And it's a great way to get society's most up-to-date values incorporated in their public art. Temporary also encourages people to go visit those spaces, and it can also play an important message in the art itself. Last year, this miniature art gallery called OMG opened and traveled around Ottawa, staying in one location for a day or two. This was curated by artist Jennifer Ann Kelly, and it displayed work by dozens of local artists at the time. There's also an artist in Ottawa called Finding Nomi, who makes and hides gnomes all over the city, and he'll post a picture and their location for his viewers to go and try and find. If you find the gnome, you get to keep it. And I was very lucky this year. I found my own gnome on, it's very proudly displayed in my room. He also has partnered with the Ottawa Public Library to kind of encourage kids to visit the library and look around the shelves to find the gnomes and hopefully some books to take home too. Now, murals can also be incorporated into an already existing building without overtaking ground space, and a wide range of artists can have their voices heard, and new stories can be told in an old building. The BYTOWN Museum just went through this process in the fall of 2020, where they put out a call on their social media for local Algonquin artist or team to paint a mural as part of the new programming. This was part of a much larger project where they've added more Algonquin text to museum panels, and it just brightens up the space. When you enter the museum, you're greeted by this beautiful mural that tells the history of the local Algonquin nation, and it's quite cool. So why more murals now? Walking around the community in the last 4 or 5 years, you'll probably have noticed an increase of street art. A few weeks ago, I was talking to Lindsay, one of the founders of the Urban Art Collective, which is a collective of street artists and local artists in Ottawa. And she points out that although Ottawa was building a mural culture before the pandemic, it really saw an increase during the pandemic. In 2021, CBC ran an article that looked at the mural growth in Centretown 1 year into the pandemic. It had an interview with one of the founders of the House of Paint, and kind of shared how murals was a way the city could use to encourage people to come and visit areas that they haven't been, and to also encourage people to go outside and walk around while still maintaining and respecting social distancing. For these reasons, we saw the city being adding more murals, and in this CTV article, it also shows that in the fall of 2020, Ottawa Public Health put out a call for artists to submit ideas for temporary murals to raise awareness of the COVID Wise campaign. Now, the city also funds murals in other ways through educational programs as a way to control graffiti, as we mentioned before. And through the Paint It Up program, which is a joint partnership between the City of Ottawa and Crime Prevention Ottawa, they've engaged almost 3,000 youth aged 12 to 25 in mural painting. And since its creation in 2010, have added almost 90 murals to the outside spaces in Ottawa. Now, this is an exciting time for street and public art in Ottawa, and we've seen a big change in the last 5 years, and I think in the next 10 years, you'll notice an even bigger change. And one of the areas if you're interested in street art, that I highly recommend going to is the Urban Art Collective. They have a building in Hintonburg. They attained the building in late 2022. And like the website says, is really a great place to go and support your local street artists. They have a shop where you can buy stickers or posters or artwork done by local artists. And they also run local night markets, and you can also hire artists through them. And it's a great way to support those local artists. So thank you. Like I said, I think street art has really undergone a change in the recent times, and it's an exciting time to be a viewer because I think it's going to keep changing in the best way possible.
Amazing. Thank you, Emma, for that. That was a wonderful presentation. I think that part about the Finding Nomi, I will have to go follow them because I am now very intrigued. So wonderful. Thank you for that.
There's also an artist called Miniature Street Life who hides tiny food around Ottawa too. So definitely worth a follow too.
That's amazing. I love it. Okay. So we will now move on to the question and answer period of our lecture. So the first question that Emma and I will be chatting about. So Emma, how does local street art in Ottawa work to tell the city's history? And then I guess part two would be, where does the history of public art begin in Ottawa?
Okay. So local street art can tell local community values, and I'll go back into that in a second, but really the history of public art can date back to how old Ottawa or BYTOWN is itself. And one form of public art is murals, but another form is sculptures. I believe the first sculpture was placed on Parliament Hill around 1885. And there's just been like shifts of what's been popular and what's not. And we've gone kind of from statues to mural. Now, Ottawa has this unique challenge with the public art that I imagine a lot of capital cities have. We use a lot of public art to remember events and to commemorate people. And Ottawa as a capital city doesn't just have the responsibility of telling Ottawa's story. It also has the added responsibility to tell all of Canada's story as well. And I think that's difficult because like, where does Ottawa as a city end and where does Ottawa as a capital start, and like how much should overlap or not? And I would love to compare how much art, like public art, like sculptures and statues that Ottawa has to like another Canadian city of the same size, because I'm sure there's a vastly different amounts and types, but I don't know if anyone's ever done a study on it before. Now, murals as a form of public art, I think is really important, as I think it's a lot more accessible for community organizations to kind of access. That you can already incorporate them into spaces you own. You can put them on the type of walls, either inside or outside. And I think murals also have the added value. I think people who are adding a mural to a public space, like outside the store or home, they're more likely to hire a local artist rather than an international one, just through like access and community things. So I think murals are kind of very like where public art is, for a number of different reasons.
Amazing. I think what I've learned throughout this lecture is that I would like to learn more about public art as it relates to mural and graffiti, because it's very intriguing, and I feel like before this lecture I wasn't totally aware of the history of public art and street art in Ottawa. So wonderful. Okay, so our next question is related to kind of comparing murals and statues to, I guess, the impermanency of such art. So as we know, street art is temporary in nature. In Ottawa and other major Canadian cities such as Toronto and Montreal, public understands that murals, statues, and graffiti are fairly impermanent. Compared to other forms of storytelling, does street art better reflect the changing values of society? Part two, I guess, would be, does street art allow artists to keep up with the evolving values and ideals of cities?
So I'm not a painter, I'm just a viewer. So this is something I decided to Google. And according to like the website Happy Decay, that there's two common types of paint used in murals. One is aerosol in a spray can, and then one is acrylic and house paint. When outside, depending on the location and the weather, aerosol only really holds colors for 5 to 10 years. And house paint can hold color maybe for 10 plus years. So this really isn't a lot of time. And also like there's ways to extend this. Like if you add coatings, if an artist is able to touch up their works, but it's really a short lifespan. You also have the added challenge of some murals that are in buildings can change hands, and a new owner might not want that mural there, as it might not reflect their values. Or the building might not just last. It might need an addition, or it might need some work done, and that might destroy the mural in the process. So in no way are these murals like permanent. Now, I really do feel learning about one's community history is through your physical space. And this can be walking down the street and reading street names. But this also has to do with like statues and things. And statues and monuments are really tricky because they have this bad habit of outliving the society that built them. And this can be done on a really big scale like Stonehenge, or a much smaller scale like statues of John A. And statues are tricky because when choosing materials, or statues and monuments are tricky because when you're choosing materials to build like items or places of commemoration, we have the technology to make something last almost forever, but like, should we? So you get to this problem where even a well-made statue or monument will need upkeep and maintenance after a couple decades. And you have the problem of the community then having to spend money to upkeep a statue or a monument that they might feel that doesn't reflect them or communicates their ideas. And like the question is like, should they? And even if you just leave it to decay, commemorations is ongoing process. And even by having it displayed or choosing to maintain, you're engaging in commemoration and remembrance, whether positive or negative. And that's one of the tricky things about inheriting like statues. Like street art is kind of, or murals are kind of nice, is because it has that set kind of deadline of like 5 to 10 years where you can just like revisit a space and choose to revitalize it. Now, then one of the nice things is while choosing to revitalize it, you kind of leave room open to new people and new ideas and new events. And you can allow other voices to be part of that conversation. And you can have those deeper conversations of what a community chooses to celebrate and what you might be more critical about later on.
Wow. So what I'm gathering, it's a very convoluted question, and it's a convoluted answer to give. But I like that you framed it as a, even if we could, should we continue on with this? So wonderful then. So this kind of correlates to our third question, and our final question before our audience Q&A. So as we saw from 2020 to the beginning of 2021, Ottawa and other areas across Canada witnessed a movement which advocated for the removal of various statues that depicted prominent yet controversial Canadian figures, such as John A, as you previously noted. How has public interpretation of statues changed since the 1960s onwards?
So when you sent me this question, like this was something I chose to reach out to Capital Heritage Connection, which is another heritage group in Ottawa. And the acting director Megan Walsh, since they have just released a report on their website on their bilingual public engagement sections on the City of Ottawa's Commemoration Development Project. And the report is about 91 pages, but I really recommend those interested in the topic and what Ottawa may or may not do to read the report, because I think it gives a fuller picture and to kind of keep tabs on where the report and the development plan is going. Now, the report really looks at how since 2012, the city has been looking at community partners to kind of guide its commemoration projects as part of its cultural development mandate. And Capital Heritage Ottawa partnered with the city in late 2017 and has since held 2 public engagement ceremonies, one in 2018 and then one just last year in one in March in 2023. And the sections hope to get feedback on Ottawa's through normal people in Ottawa and through the public. And the CHC really heard 3 main points that the public were really concerned about through about the commission, how we remember things. And one was commemoration should be a community-led and community-driven initiative. The second was, with the support of the City of Ottawa, there should be a diverse and inclusive background that represents communities including Indigenous, LGBT+, Francophone, and from youth too. And the third one is there should be transparency and accessible communication throughout the whole commemoration project. And this is, I think, really important because it does show what people who came to the public who came to these sessions were really aware of and really, really wanted to know and make sure that the city heard. Now, going back to the question at hand, I also wanted to get Megan's view since she has been engaged with this topic much longer than I have. And one of the things she pointed out that since the 1960s, there's really just been more communication with people in different communities across the world. And people increasingly have access to more information. And this has asked them, well, this has just exposed them to like more perspectives and more stories and more people and more history. And they're more likely to ask questions and also like bring up their perspective and their agency, where they might have had to remain quiet beforehand. So I definitely recommend checking out the report because I think it will just do so much more for those interested in this topic.
I actually last night I did some digging through that document, and it's very informative. It might be lengthy, but I agree, Emma. It is definitely a great resource for those who are looking to learn more about this topic.
I think we just shared it in chat too, but you can also find it on CHC's webpage as well.
Wonderful. Okay, amazing. So I noticed we already have some questions coming in through our Q&A box. So we will go and kind of go through those together and answer some of the audience questions. So I'll just go in the order they came in. But so Courtney asked, what kind of trends do you think might influence the next phase of street art in Ottawa?
Oh, pardon?
So can you see the Q&A box on your side of the
Oh, yes, I can.
Yes.
That's an interesting question because I think trends, I think social media really determines what trends we see, especially in art. Maybe from a commercial side, with my experience working at a pottery painting studio, we can see a trend on TikTok, and then the next week we can see people start to paint it on pottery. So I think like it's one of those things I think that maybe too big a question for me to answer. But I think whatever is being talked about online and through different communities and on social media tends to influence the direction of where the art's going.
For sure. Awesome question, Courtney. Thank you very much. All right, so we'll just keep going down the list. So the next question, first, they say great talk. Thank you very much. So given the fact that the word graffiti has a rich historical significance, particularly around racialized persons, would the term vandalism be better to refer to illegal markings?
That's an interesting question. So when I was talking, one of the things I did before I gave this talk, I went and had a conversation with Lindsay over at Urban Art Collective. And one of the things she pointed out that like because graffiti is a way to communicate, often you have to look at the areas where you're seeing graffiti pop up. Sometimes it is those more marginalized groups, and sometimes it's the only tool they have to express emotions. Graffiti is, of course, a way for the artist to leave a message for the viewer, and sometimes it's the only thing that works because of how how society wants to clean it up and control it. I live by Westgate, and going past one of the homes, or like they're currently building an apartment building where I live, and it's on the apartment building sign, there's some graffiti that says "Stop the gentrification of Westboro." So that's an important message that someone's trying to communicate. But it's probably the only way they have to communicate with a large audience in a way that feels meaningful for them. So I don't know if that answers the questions, but it's tricky because I think vandalism has a very negative connotation, but also graffiti also has a negative attached to it as well.
For sure. Awesome. Thanks, Emma. All right. So the next question is from Julie, and Julie's wondering if there was Indigenous public art before BYTOWN, so I guess before colonialism.
That is a question I do not know, but would love to find the answer to. And I know as someone who is of settler descent that I think I'm going to spend some time doing some research so I can find the answer. But no, that's a really good question.
It is, yes. Nice one, Julie. All right. So the next question. So this viewer says, I noticed a form of street art was not included in your presentation. Do you consider yarn bombing to be street art? And if so, what is your knowledge of it?
Oh, yarn burning. So for those who don't know, yarn burning is those who can knit. Sometimes they'll add yarn and knitting around certain objects. So like you can go and find a tree outside and it might have like a knitted tube around it. I really like it. It would be like, unless you have permission from the person owning the property, it would be considered graffiti, but I do really like it. I think it's a way that you can add color, and it's kind of just fun.
I will say that before 30 seconds ago, I had no idea what yarn bombing was, but I think I need to go look more into that because that sounds amazing. Okay, so our final audience question is from Bill. And Bill says, I assume that the city of Ottawa has an annual budget for street art in general. Do you know how much this is per year and how this compares to other cities on a per capita basis?
Oh, that's a great question. So when I Googled the city website and I looked at, one of the things I really wanted to look at while researching is the different bylaws and graffiti management plans. And I couldn't find that through the public website. And that probably tells you something together. But it would be something that I would like to know as well. But I did find the information really difficult to locate.
Fair enough. Okay, I have one more question to ask you, Emma, if the audience has finished. If not, you guys can feel free to send in your questions in the Q&A box or just turn on your mic to chat with Emma, whatever you are most comfortable with. But my question is, so during the presentation, you kind of touched on the barriers to street art,
Yeah,
and what that looked like in Ottawa. Besides the, I guess, the stigma around graffiti
yeah.
and vandalism, what other barriers have you noticed as it relates to art in Ottawa?
So there's a couple. One of the things is the space. Like Ottawa does only have 3 legal walls to practice, and they're in very different parts of the city. So it would be, I think, nice to increase the public walls, and that could also be a barrier, a solution to controlling some unwanted tags as well, is by having more spaces to freely practice. Another barrier is the application process to create is to get like the permits to print murals. I believe even if you have like you own your home, you still have to apply for a permit, and bylaw still has to approve it. And you still have to go through a process, even putting a mural on a business as well. As you also mentioned, there's a stigma, and there's also like, of course, like a financial aspect is you have to have some kind of money to buy materials to practice.
Right. Okay. Amazing. Emma, one last. I know I have. I was my last question. But one last question that I have to is: out of all the forms of art we've discussed, what is your favorite form of street art?
Ooh. So a year ago, it was murals, and I really enjoyed murals. But within the last year, I really enjoyed the miniatures. Like I'm a big fan of Finding Nomi, who hides the gnomes around Ottawa. I'm a really big fan of Ottawa Miniatures, who adds like little food. There's this mural at Britannia, and it's painted by an artist called TRP, but Ottawa Miniature has added food to it. And when I was in Kingston last year, there was really cool. Someone had 3D printed skulls and has attached them and glued them to different lampposts. So a year ago, I really would have said murals, but lately I'm really enjoying like miniatures and sculptures being added around. And my favorite might also change in a year from now.
Of course. I think this whole talk about miniatures, honestly has inspired me. Before our work on this, I really only thought of street art as statues and murals, and now I know that it stems way beyond that. So I think I speak for a lot of the audience when I say I've learned a lot about this topic throughout our work together. Okay, so I think this concludes tonight's Beyond BYTOWN lecture. I would like to thank everyone for coming. It was an honor to have you all on board. And of course, Emma, thank you so much for your work with me on this topic. It was so awesome to work with you, and I hope we can do this again in the future. Of course, you're always welcome at BYTOWN. So I think that's it for me. I would like to encourage you all to attend the museum's next Beyond BYTOWN lecture on October 19th with Dave Tulloch. Dave we'll be discussing the history of Ottawa's urban community and how this community is progressing throughout the decade. Again, thank you all for coming. It was a wonderful night, and enjoy the rest of your evening.